Okay, think about this. An elite federal agency, operating mostly in the shadows, its job, protecting the absolute highest levels of power in the country. But what happens when that very agency, the one meant to be, well, flawless, finds itself right in the middle of some very public, very messy controversies?
Yeah, when its own integrity gets questioned, what does that actually signal
Exactly.
about national security
Yeah,
and, crucially, public trust?
exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive into the United States Secret Service. Now, I think for most people you hear Secret Service, you immediately picture agents, dark suits, earpieces,
Yeah.
like protecting the president, the vice president, their families, maybe visiting heads of state.
hmm That iconic image.
And look, that protection role is absolutely central, but their mission is actually broader, it's dual, and it's changed a lot over time. Beyond just protection, they're also heavily involved in investigating things like cybercrime, financial fraud, and direct threats against national leaders.
And the reason this is so critical to discuss now is that despite this really vital, noble purpose, the agency's been facing, well, mounting scrutiny. Quite a bit, actually. We're talking about clear operational slip-ups, accusations of political entanglements, and some serious ethical questions.
It feels like a really important moment to unpack what's going on.
It really is, to understand the pressures they're under and maybe some of the systemic issues at play.
Okay, so where do we even start trying to understand these controversies, this complex agency? One thing that jumped out at me digging through the sources for this was just how it started. It's kind of surprising. Founded way back, 1865, under the Treasury Department, not Homeland Security initially.
Right.
And get this, its first job wasn't protection, not at all. It was created to fight the massive counterfeiting problem that was, wrecking the economy after the Civil War.
That's absolutely right. It's quite a pivot, isn't it? From chasing down counterfeit bills to presidential protection. That role, the one they're famous for now, didn't even begin until 1901. It was after President McKinley was assassinated. That was the trigger.
Wow, okay. So protection came much later.
Much later. And then another huge shift, post 9/11. In 2003, they moved over to become part of the newly formed Department of Homeland Security, DHS. It's really a history of constantly adapting, expanding responsibilities.
So given that long history, that critical mission, why all the intense scrutiny now? What specifically has been happening lately?
Well, it seems to be a convergence of several very visible, very public incidents that have really pushed them into a harsh spotlight. And when you look at those flashpoints, maybe the biggest one, the one that caused the most waves recently, was related to the January 6th Capitol attack, specifically the issue of deleted text messages.
Right, those deleted texts. That story was particularly jarring. Why was that specific incident so damaging for the agency?
Well, during the investigations into the January 6th insurrection, the accusation emerged that the Secret Service had erased text messages from agents' phones. And these weren't just any texts. They were from the period right around January 6th.
Texts that investigators wanted to see.
Exactly. The House Select Committee investigating the attack specifically requested them. And then the Inspector General, who's supposed to be the internal watchdog, launched their own investigation. They were trying to determine if the deletion was, accidental, maybe part of a routine data migration gone wrong, or if it was negligent or possibly even deliberate.
Deliberate erasure would be huge.
Huge. And the whole thing just raised these really deep concerns about transparency, about basic record keeping, and frankly, the very worrying possibility of politicization, within an agency that absolutely has to be seen as neutral.
And it wasn't just digital issues, right? There were also some alarming problems with the physical security of the White House itself, those intrusion incidents. The one that always sticks with me is 2014. An intruder gets over the fence, runs across the lawn, gets inside the executive mansion, deep inside, only stopped after getting into the East Room. That's just hard to believe.
It truly was a shock, a major security breach.
Yeah.
And like you said, it wasn't entirely isolated. There are other intrusion incidents around that time, too, which collectively revealed pretty significant gaps in their physical security protocols, their alarm systems, their response times. It forced a really hard look at their operational readiness.
Okay, so we have the texts, the physical intrusions, and then there were the scandals involving agents themselves. Those really seem to erode public trust. I think many people remember the 2012 scandal in Colombia, prostitution involving several agents right when they were there setting up for a presidential visit.
That one got a lot of headlines, yes.
But it wasn't just that one big event, was it? It feels like there's been a pattern, sort of an accumulation of things.
That's a good way to put it. Beyond Colombia, there have been other reported incidents, things like alcohol-related misconduct, agents misusing government vehicles for personal trips, just general unprofessional behavior during overseas assignments. It suggests that maybe these aren't just isolated bad apples, but perhaps point to something larger.
Which leads to the next question, right? What are these larger issues? Are these individual incidents symptoms of uh, deeper systemic problems within the agency?
That's exactly the question many observers are asking. What's fascinating here is what these incidents might tell us about broader structural concerns. And one major issue that comes up repeatedly is understaffing and budget strains.
Being stretched too thin.
Severely, by many accounts. The agency is often reported to be understaffed. Agents are overworked, facing incredibly long hours, immense stress. There's very little margin for error in their line of work. This kind of constant, high demand, high risk, it leads to burnout, naturally. But maybe more critically, you have to wonder how that strain might, subtly or not so subtly, impact judgment. Does it force shortcuts? Does it compromise decision-making in high-stakes moments?
That makes a lot of sense. When you're constantly operating at maximum capacity, something's got to give eventually. What else is potentially contributing?
Well, another factor is leadership turnover. There have been pretty frequent changes at the very top of the Secret Service.
A revolving door, almost.
You could say that. And that kind of instability at the leadership level, it inevitably affects morale down the ranks. It can also really impede the implementation of long-term reforms. If the direction keeps changing, it's hard to fix underlying problems. Institutional memory gets lost.
Right. And then there's the issue that feels maybe the most sensitive. Conflicts of loyalty, political pressure.
hmm This is incredibly delicate territory.
The Secret Service is supposed to be fundamentally apolitical, right? A neutral entity protecting the office, not the person's politics.
Absolutely. That's the ideal. But some of the controversies, particularly during the Trump administration, led to suggestions that those lines were becoming blurred. There were critics alleging that certain protection decisions, certain strategies might have been influenced, perhaps subtly, perhaps not, by political optics.
Meaning how things would look politically rather than purely what was best for security.
That's the allegation, that choices were made based on how they might be perceived by political figures or the public, potentially diverging from strict, objective security protocols.
That's a really troubling idea. But I wonder, isn't there always going to be some tension there? I mean, they work so closely with the political figures. Isn't it almost inevitable that accusations of political influence will pop up, even if unfounded? Seems like a tough balancing act.
Oh, it's absolutely an unavoidable tension. It highlights the enormous challenge they face, maintaining strict neutrality while being physically embedded within the very center of political power. It's an incredibly difficult line to walk. But the concerns raised in some reports went beyond just perception. They suggested actual operational decisions might have been swayed. And it's precisely because of this whole constellation of concerns, the texts, the intrusions, the agent conduct, the systemic issues that we've seen significant investigations, and these widespread calls for reform.
Okay, so let's talk about those reforms. What are people actually demanding? What are lawmakers, watchdog groups? What are they pushing for specifically?
There are several key areas. First, there's a strong call for much greater congressional oversight. Basically, more eyes on the agency's operations, more transparency demanded by Congress.
More accountability upwards.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Related to that, clearer lines of command and accountability within the Department of Homeland Security, ensuring that leadership, both within the service and at DHS, is clearly held responsible for failures. Another big one is better whistleblower protections. Agents need to feel safe reporting misconduct or concerns internally without fearing reprisal. That's seen as crucial for fostering a more ethical culture.
Makes sense. If people are afraid to speak up, problems fester.
Precisely. Then, especially after the text message issue, there's a major push to modernize their communication systems, their data management, their cybersecurity protocols, bringing those up to date.
Updating the tech.
Right. And maybe overarching all of this is a call for a real cultural overhaul within the agency, one that deeply ingrains ethics, neutrality, and professionalism as core, non-negotiable values at every level.
So we've talked about the agency, the problems, the proposed fixes. Let's bring it back to the listener. What does all this mean for you? For us as citizens, why should we care about the internal challenges of the Secret Service beyond just, the headlines?
Well, it matters profoundly, actually, because the Secret Service's mission is so fundamentally tied to national stability and our trust in government institutions.
Sure.
Think about it. Failures in presidential safety. That's not just about one person. It could lead to catastrophic national trauma. It would shake the entire country. potentially the world.
The stakes couldn't be higher there.
Exactly. And the president's security, it's symbolic, right? It represents America's stability, both here at home and how we're perceived globally.
Right.
And when faith erodes in elite, critical institutions like the Secret Service, well, that chips away at the foundations of democracy itself. It fosters cynicism.
That's a crucial point.
And finally, remember those scandals abroad. Misconduct during international trips or summits reflects really poorly on the United States as a whole. It can damage our image and complicate foreign relations.
It really makes me think of something from our sources, this idea that the Secret Service, by its very nature, operates in the shadows, silent, swift, and secretive. But, crucially, silence must not mean a lack of accountability.
That captures the paradox perfectly.
It's this fascinating and frankly worrying situation when a watchdog agency itself seems to be in need of watching. The ongoing challenge really for the Secret Service is clear. Confront these flaws honestly, commit to real, meaningful reform, and somehow rebuild public confidence. Confidence that those entrusted with protecting power wield that responsibility with unimputable honor and integrity, even while maintaining that necessary veil of secrecy. And that, for you, is ultimately what's at stake here.